At the launch of the Aldersgate Group's resource efficiency report, Beyond Carbon, Jack Frost of Johnson Matthey argues the importance of this unfashionable policy area and stresses that we must be clear what we're asking of the market if we want an economic solution to resource management.
Thanks for the opportunity to say a few words here. I was have to congratulate the Aldersgate Group on tackling this topic. I think it's their persistence, because they've been banging on about it for years, but also for being just plain brave, really, because it's a very unfashionable, unpopular area, resource efficiency. I sort of know it's unpopular because I was asking another group a few days ago what measures there were which addressed the carbon embedded in the production and delivery of goods and services, as compared to the vast array of measures which are there to support things like renewables and such like. And maybe you can do better, but that group couldn't come up with any measures which directly addressed embedded carbon in goods and services. So a very unfashionable policy area in many ways, which is curious because, after all, what's not to like about resource efficiency? It's good for the planet and it saves you money as well. So it really ought to be quite popular, you would have thought. I suppose that's part of the problem, really, for policymakers, is because they don't quite see, to my mind, what to do about it. And I think the argument goes something like this. After all, if a resource costs a lot, then surely normal economic activity will cause investment and innovation to use less of it, or to substitute it for, or have something substitute it. So what do we need to do in terms of policy? We can just leave that up to the market to deal with. And there must be some truth to this. I forget who it was who said that the Stone Age didn't end through a lack of stones, but I think it's absolutely certain that the iPod age won't end because we run out of lithium for the batteries. So I think the problem here is really, as for the policy perspective, is what's policy going to do in this area that adds something to it? Now the argument then goes, of course, well actually resource, when they're expensive, yes, they get optimised, but when they're cheap, they're not really cheap. And that's because we haven't included the true cost of the resources that we're using. And if only we managed to do that, if only we managed to deal with the external cost of these things, then somehow that would put things right. I think I've got two reservations about that approach. The first, apart from the obvious difficulty of costing those externalities, is that our best price setting mechanism that we have is actually the market. And of course the market has comprehensively failed to price those resources at their true worth. And so we're going to do a second best job by ascribing a price to them if we price those externalities, and we're likely, if history is any guide, not to do that particularly well. But the other problem is that the things that we're trying to price, our very pricing mechanisms are inadequate for. Not to put too fine a point on it, the damage being caused by the reckless use of resources in the mode that we're doing at the moment is damaging things which are actually priceless. You've all seen heard the advert, for this you can, such and such costs threepence, such and such costs twopence more, such and such is, a day with the kids is priceless, and then you got the use your MasterCard, you can buy the things that cost money, but you can't buy the things that are priceless. And that's simply the truth of it. It's our approach to this problem, by regarding it as an economic problem, is inadequate to ascribe value to these things in the way that their value needs to be raised. So I think the difficulty of dealing with this as a mere problem of pricing externalities is really not easy to overcome. Not to say that we shouldn't try it. Clearly it would be a better thing if externalities are priced in as best we can, but it's unrealistic to expect to do a good job on that. More importantly, of course, in many cases, the cost of the resource that's being used in the product, goods or service isn't particularly important to the person buying that goods or service. You find time and time again, when you look at the resource usage in a product or a service, that actually it would be easy to improve the resource efficiency in that service, just that no one's got round to it, because other aspects of the product are much, much more important. Does it do what it's supposed to do? Is it reliable? Does it satisfy a whole range of other criteria are much, much more important than the relatively small resource costs contained in the product. And therefore, pricing that resource more highly means that you have to price it quite a lot higher to cause a change. And we've seen the difficulties that incurs when you try to look at pricing carbon in products. In order to cause real change, you frequently have to price the carbon at a very high price indeed to achieve that change. And that seems to be, to some extent, counterintuitive to me. What you're doing, you're pricing something to make it less attractive, increasing costs, when actually what you want to do is to make the right thing to do attractive. So the penalising by price of bad things is again, not a very satisfactory policy. But I'm not going to talk too much about price because of an idea that Paul Eakins would talk much more eloquently than I can about that topic, and probably persuade you differently from my point of view. Wouldn't surprise me at all. So we talked there about this market failure associated with resource usage. We can't seem to price it. And I think we've had several people comment on this. I think Lord Stern said that he regarded climate change as the greatest market failure the world has ever seen. And I suppose I know, I'm quite certain that in a technical sense, Lord Stern's correct. But in at least one sense, I think he must be wrong. And I think in one sense at least, markets are being given a bit of a bad press on these sorts of issues, to be honest. After all, if you think about it, the world we've got at the moment is pretty much exactly the world we asked for. We asked for cheap energy. We didn't say anything about the carbon content or carbon production of that energy. We asked for it to be available. I think it's fair to say that actually, in my experience, markets are usually very good at delivering exactly what you asked for. And there's the problem. We don't always ask for what we want. We think we've asked for something, but we've asked for something different. It's the 3 wishes from the genie problem. It's curiously difficult to phrase your request so that you don't have some unexpected outcome from it. But when you look at it, wherever markets are performing, they do actually tend to give you exactly what you've actually asked for. I've good experience of this. I'm a supplier to other companies, and we're very, very careful to listen not just to what the customer says, but also to try to ascertain what they really want and what they really value. And I think, by and large, markets tend to give that answer rather than perhaps the example, the answer that you thought you'd asked for. So I think, in a very real sense, then, Lord Stern's wrong, and actually markets do give us very accurately what we ask for. The trouble is, we've often failed to ask what we want, or we've asked for the wrong thing from those markets. And I think this is really where the report also is on the right track, when it says that price itself isn't the answer to this resource problem in its own right. We need to look at other measures that can bring other concerns in, and in particular those things which are priceless to us in our value scheme. And I think that, but we can bring those things into play, and there are various mechanisms and tools that we have to do that. Clearly, regulation is one. Regulation is fearfully complicated at the best of times in terms of having the right effect and the right mechanisms. Clearly there should be scope for it in this area, but it's very hard to see exactly how that comes into play, if for no other reason that the resource efficiency is actually quite hard to measure and therefore quite hard to legislate for. My own personal favourite for action in this area, however, is one that has a great deal more flexibility than regulation, and that's the use of procurement techniques to do this. Now this can be achieved often quite simply. We've had some good experience of doing this in other areas. I was working with the prison service for a while, who bought prison mattresses. And we talked to them, and they decided to ask the next time the contract came up for renewal for a zero waste prison mattress. And lo and behold, that's exactly what they got. It didn't cost any more than the mattresses they were buying. They got it from the marketplace because they'd actually asked for that rather than failed to ask for that. So we can use procurement to affect what we get quite dramatically if we choose to. And I think we do have the opportunity to choose to. And if we do that in such a way that we use procurement strategically, then we can change the nature of the supply chains that are available to us. Now, I'm not talking about procurement from consumers. People often talk about consumer demand as a great engine of this, that, and the other, and indeed it is, but consumers don't create supply chains. They choose between the products that are available to them on the shelf. I'm talking here about the process that creates and produces different products to be available to people to buy. And those are companies, that's B2B type stuff, that's in the design of products and services. And it's those supply chains that we can change, quite sharply if we wish. And indeed, I think the report contains the elements of something that we could take a look at in terms of changing the structure of our supply chains by focusing attention on services as a way of encapsulating some of the values that we need to be encapsulated in our goods and services. Provision of a service from cradle to the grave and back again intrinsically allows a mechanism, allows that company to be taking account of the life cycle of its products. The report points to the importance of life cycle analysis to allow us to place a proper value on these things. So if we structured our supply chains to focus more on services, we would have the right sort of delivery mechanism than compared to the current delivery mechanisms that we have. And we could use regulation and public procurement to encourage the development of service type delivery mechanisms. If we did that, we can also have more influence on companies that are delivering services because they are more sensibly economically rational operations and can be affected much more clearly and effectively by regulation and procurement policies. I commend this report to you. I think it contains an awful lot of good stuff. I do think, though, that it's an area that really needs a lot of more active debate going forward, and I've made a few suggestions as to where I think that debate perhaps could go. Thanks very much.